Great peace, Yakoki. So I just got out the shower and you know, decided to come out, make another video. Um, this is retired life, you know. You have to stay active, you know what I mean? And like I'm glad I was able to get another workout in today, you know, like playing basketball. That's ultimately how I'm going to get in shape, just playing basketball. Um, I don't really care about, running. I'm more like, I like polymetrics, like bouncing the basketball or jumping with the basketball or, moving, shifting side to side, playing defense and calculating my opponent's speed and strength. I like doing that. I don't really care about tracking or, um, you know, doing any things related to acrobatics, right? Or aerobatics. Um, but, I enjoy doing that. But, I rather much play basketball with the time I have. But the thing I want to say is that, and oh yeah, this like I'm shaped like Bonzi Wells, you know what I mean? So if I were to be in the league or play point guard or shooting guard position, right? I would be like a 6 foot guard who could, outpower the other guard. Given that they have my size, right? I would be able to outpower them. So I notice like when I play people in basketball, give them, my weight. Um, it could be a challenge for them sometimes because they'll like stretch. They'll do the stretch thing where they'll go out to the perimeter and shoot. So I noticed that. Me particularly, right? I like to stay under the rim and get to the rim, But I could do shooting. I can pretty much play pick and pop, or either end, right? Offense, defense. I can do that. Um, and I've been sending some of my clips to like universities, because like that'd be good. Like if I can get in on coaching or something like that or contribute, that'd be cool. I'll let it do something like that, But taking it serious, that's something I could have did when I was like 140 pounds, and eventually I'll get back there. I don't really see why I would gain more weight. Like I need to lose weight. So. Um, and I think eventually that will happen. But what I want to talk about today is um, Judge Mathis show. It's been on my mind, man. Like I didn't know he still made those premieres. I didn't know. Like I didn't know he was still making seasons. Um, but it's like this one particular show is still on my mind, man. It's like, and I saw this like a year or two ago, 3 years ago. Like it's been on my mind. Um, he was talking about the wars in Chicago, and he was talking about how the train system connects to different people, like North Carolina to New York, North Carolina to Georgia. He was talking about all of that, Pittsburgh and how that connects to other places down south and, Chicago to Mississippi, right? But this is the thing, right? I'm from Chicago, so I've seen like people lose their life over street wars but I never really cared to devolve in it in so much as learning about it, like what happens right now, like keeping up with what's going on there. I don't care about it because like you are what you see, you are what you eat, you are what you breathe, you are what you say, so when people make that stuff their life, like watching the rappers and stuff like that, like that should make you want to be different. Like, watching a person get out of jail after they murdered someone, like you don't want to be a part of any of that type of life. That lifestyle, like it catches up with you. And this is why I've always been lucky to have done things where I'm caring for people or giving them people, right? You can't live a lifestyle where you're harming people and not expect karma to ultimately remove you from the base of this planet. You know what I mean? Like when you're doing things to people and like taking advantage of them, like embarrassing them and stuff like that. That stuff catches up with you. It catches up with you because like a lot of times people, if you walk into these police stations, man, you see these people, right? You don't know who they know, right? A lot of these people have military experience. Like they sit and watch these people put their life online every day, and they see them do things that will question their intellect. When I look at the wars in Chicago, right, you know, me and my cousin, we talk about this all the time, like just what goes on there and how you see the history with the French Indian Wars, right? France against the British Crown, and you know, nothing has changed. Only thing that's changed is that the monarchy, right? It's been given to the Europa tribes, meaning King Charles the second, you know, his descendants aren't necessarily, apart from Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles, right, and Prince Harry. Apart from them, right, I'm talking about like my grandfather, for instance, right? His family is from South Carolina. So that's Tim Scott people, right? They're with the British people. They're English, you know. So I look at that, right? And I say, you look at what happens on 63rd and St. Lawrence, and you look at what happens on 64th and King Drive. Well, that's the French-Quebec Wars. It's the same war. It's families who lived over there all these years, who they may or may not, right, know about the history between the Wabanaki and the Lenape and the Cherokee. It's the same people. That's why I don't tell people when they ask, like, you know, what tribe are you and stuff like that. Like, that's not important. This is why Dr. Umar Johnson said what he said when he was like, I'm not coming to South Africa to be a part of the Khoisan. I'm not coming to be a part of the Zulu. You know, he was naming all the tribes in South Africa. He was telling them, like, I'm coming to be an African. I'm not coming to be a tribe. You know, so you look at the St. Lawrence River, how it goes into Canada, and it comes from New York, ultimately from Britain. All these people are the same people, but they're warring. Well, now, right, it's not really, it kind of is. It's about trade. Back then, it was about fur trades and settlements. So when you see the Lenape and the Wabanaki and the Comanche warring with each other, right, those are black tribes. One-sided with the French, one-sided with the King of Britain, which would be the English. And again, Judge Mathis, he was talking about this. He was talking about it on his show. He was talking about the wars that happened on King Drive in St. Lawrence. Because he's from Detroit. He's not from Chicago. But, you know, I think his show at one point in time was based out of Chicago. So he talks about that. And even like from the area I grew up in, right, they may not know this, you know, like the people over there, the young people, but that started from the Dominican and Haitian wars, you know. And again, it was about trade and settlements, you know. You never supposed to get in wars over territory, especially if you have an embassy and a base, a military base. You're never supposed to get in wars. So like when I see that type of stuff happening, you know, all I do is just look at, you know, the bands that are nearby, right, the streets. Torlik, that's Sudan. I know that's a Turtle Clan. Tallman, again, that's a Turtle Clan. All these people are from mutations of turtles. So if you see someone who is 5'7", 5'8", and you know they're having trouble with the people around them, right? For whatever reason, whether it be offensive, defensive, whatever it may be, because I'm into basketball. This type of diagnostic, what you see, right? This logistic, this is from the people. Like, you're not, if you see a lion in the wild and it's near a gazelle, it's going to hunt down the gazelle. And I could never understand this when I was growing up in Chicago. Like, why are the people so violent? Because, like, I grew up having a grudge. I wasn't violent. I just grew up having a grudge, because of my circumstances. But I noticed, like, a lot of black people and majority in cities, right, throughout the world, right, you will see black people who have a violent edge. This is why I don't understand why people say you're not mutated from, you're not mutated from this, you're not mutated from that. We're all mutations of something. So it's interesting when I talk about that and I see that. It's interesting, you see I had this book right here. You have to learn the languages of the origins around you, right? You have to learn the origin of these languages. When I see a Sudanese language, I know it's related to a Tokyo language. When I see a Tokyo language, I know it's related to a Tallman language. I know language, I know origin, and I know codex. You have to know these things. So try to save as many lives as you can. Try to engage people. Try to bring, like, credence to the things you may see, but not necessarily know how to describe or decode, but kind of like talk more about it and influence it, But any of the wars you see pretty much in America, it stems from the French and Haitian War. Pretty much. The English versus the French. The English was on the side of the Haitians. The Chinese were on the side of the Haitians. The United States was on the side of the French. It's still that way to this day. It's still that way to this day. But like me, right? I try to learn Ojibwe, which is a French language. I try to learn Creole, which is an English language, So you would say the French people, right? Ojibwe, they're a lighter skinned people, right? They were the hustlers, the stickers, I should say the stick-ups. The English were more of the business people, more of, the trade runners, like the industry runners, I should say. They were those people. So all the people who farmed in the fields, right, with the tobacco, who were like a very dark reddish skin, very dark brown skin, sharecroppers, right? Those were the English, King Richard. And a lot of those people, right, they come from the many different tribes. Both of them do, right? The French have tribes here. The English have tribes here. An English tribe, for example, right, would be the Powhatan. A French tribe would be the Chippewa. The further west you go in America, the more French tribes you're going to see. The further south you go and the further eastward you go, the more English tribes you're going to see. Seminoles, English. Seminole, right? They have a band in Chicago called Sanglemen. Those are Seminoles. They look very Floridian. So this stuff is easy. Like when you start to learn letters, like, and it's very basic. It's the first letter of the alphabet or the first letter of the syntax or the first letter of the word. It's very easy to find out who people are. And a lot of the times, if they don't indirectly tell you, you know, you'll know by the way that they talk, the language they use. You'll know who they've been raised around. You'll know who their forefathers are. You'll know who their foreparents are. You would know. So I kind of don't look at Chicago no more because I think, like, you know, that is a violent situation. I try to learn what happens in Africa. You know, I don't look at what happens in Chicago anymore. And it's sad because I wanted to go back and live there. But, like, you know, at this point, like, it's no hierarchy there, right? You can't, if you're just a college student, right, like myself, you're just a college student just minding your business, you know, people will approach you with violence if they feel like you are a threat, you know. No one trusts anymore. No one trusts each other anymore in these places, these cities, these states, Asia, Africa. No one trusts each other. You know, I look at IShowSpeed and how he walks up and down the Asia circle, the Asia square, right? And he's in China. He's walking up and down the square. And I can see how the people, they glance at him, they look at him, but they don't engage with him, you know. He has to go up into people and, you know, introduce himself. But I think, like, when you look at Haitians, right, and you look at, you know, the English, you know, you look at all these Oriental African tribes, you know, a lot of this responsibility comes from us having not had talked to each other as much as we should have. You know, when you're on the planet so long, you start to forget certain things. You start to forget that, you know, your neighbor is thy brother. Your neighbor is thy sister. You start to forget these things, you know? You know what I mean? Like, I love, like, when I interact with my neighbors, I love it. You know what I mean? I love it because, you know, when you're in a good community, you find out you're in a good community, right? The last thing you notice is that once those neighbors are gone and, you notice that the house starts to crumble next to you or the house on the other side starts to crumble, you got to find an entirely different community. Only way you can do that is if you have finance, you know. You can't just say, I'm going to move to this area because my family live over there. You can't do that, you know. Because even family these days, they don't get along, you know. So when you find a good community, you want to take care of it, you know. So, but, like, again, the Comanche, that's Texas. They're French. And, like, you can kind of see how the different political motives people take, right? You can kind of see the influence there. Like, when I look at Brother Ben X, I see he appreciates the fact what Farrakhan is doing in Chicago, you know, and what he's doing in Texas. That's a French coalition, you know. When I look at, you know, what Dr. Sebi did in New York, right? Because these are the different celebrities, the different changing hands, the people who have influence. When you see what Dr. Sebi did in New York, I knew that was a part of the English coalition, where you have New York and Mexico. You know what I mean? That was English, you know. Montezuma, Yanga, those were English coalitions, you know. That's why, like, when people say, I'm not African or I'm American, like, I understand what you're saying, but, like, kind of look at it from a view of how you are speaking, because when you speak English, right? Well, you're probably going to get along with someone who's Irish. I know I get along with Irish people all the time, and those are the people who are considered the Picts in history, right? The small people who are not posing a threat to anyone. I get along with people because their attitude matches my attitude. It's very hard to get along with French. You know, French are people who dress up. French are people who, you know, they do things a lot differently than English. You know, a lot different. Even down to the words they use. You know, they value speaking in tongue like, you know, not traditionalists, not how traditionalists do it, but more so how, you know, it's hip hop, it's twang, it's, you know, I never tried to do that. Like, I never tried to do stuff like that, you know. That's French, you know, like how Chicagoans talk, that's French. Like, even so, like, when you look at when the English had Chicago, right? The English, you know. Jean-Baptiste du Sable, he wasn't considered a Frenchman back then, right? He was considered an English in some people's eyes, right? Because he had to be on both sides of the brigade. He had to be on both sides of the ship, you know. So he was considered French by some, he was considered English by some, but he married a French woman, you know what I mean? So that says a lot about what he was thinking, you know. Like, cause how are you Haitian and you marry a French woman? You know, like my grandfather, he's English. He married a French woman, you know, so I really need to open like eyes to like descriptors and like how people kind of see things, you know. Like, you got to really open people's eyes to seeing that, you know. So when you go towards Paiute, you go towards Shoshone, you're going to start to see civilizations like the Hopi, right? All these places near Arizona, they fell because of the wars that were taking place. And I know this because my mother, she does this all the time. She watches the Westerns. My grandfather did it. They watched the cowboys and Indians shoot each other. That was the French wars. That was the English and the French warring against each other. The cowboy was was banding with the French and the English. Then you may have had an Indian, right, a Tonto, right, who may have been with the French solely. So the French won the wars, the English lost, you know, but the English still has certain places. They still have certain places in America. But the French, they won. The French won the wars. You know, I think if the English wanted to win the wars overnight, they could, you know. But I think ultimately it's in control of who people kind of do trade with. It's not and that's, again, I don't understand it. It's not a war of who dies first. It's not a war like that. It's a war of who trades with who. If you own an economy, you know, that benefits charity, well, that person who is either English or French, he's going to win, or she's going to win, you know. So the only dynamics that I see playing out right now is that French people, you know, by large droves, they're getting locked up in the prison colony. The Englishman, right? The Englishman, he controls the education. He controls that circuit. You see what I mean? This is why you see them being, you know, Mahdi's. This is why you see them, you know, the Saudis doing deals with Donald Trump. That's an English relationship. That's not a French relationship. You know, all of the universities, whether it be scientific research, athletics, music, you know, they're all controlled by English speakers. They're not French speakers, right? The first thing you learn when you go into a school or a program is that, you know, they're going to make you, and this is what the Indian boarding schools was about. They're going to make you learn how to speak English. You know, they're going to even your temperament. So this is going to be considered politically incorrect. This is going to be considered socially inappropriate. It's going to be a lot of screening going on, right? You know, hiring processes. All of that is English practice. So you see, Saxon law is supposed to protect the French. But you see most judges, most attorneys, they don't practice Saxon law, right? They don't practice it, you know. You know, so you have Prince Charles, right? Who is now King Charles, right? He controls what happens in America, right? Through curriculum, social studies, psychology, anthropomorphic relationships. Then you have the diocese, right? The archdiocese. They're complete control over the English, and they're also in complete control over the French. You know, like this person on my shirt right here, the Black Hawk, the Chief Black Hawk. That's a picture of a French person. Although the people, right, who descend from Black Hawk, they say this logo right here, it doesn't represent how we looked, right? It's different depictions of him, but they basically say that's not how he looked, right? He was the Soak leader, you know, the Soak, what is it, Sack and Fox, you know, so. And when you look at the word Sack and Fox, it's basically just saying, be aware of your surroundings. Don't carry things in places where you're not supposed to carry them, or, you know, you're going to suffer the wrath of it, right? So if you walk with a pack of meat over your shoulder, right? You know how we used to walk the sharecroppers, right? They have the bean bag over their shoulder and they're walking down the Mississippi path or the Trail of Tears. Well, if you get attacked by a bear or a fox, you know, you should have known that whatever you had in that bag was going to pique interest. It's the same thing as escaping a prison colony, right? If a warden sees you, he's going to call you back to the prison colony. So you're going to suffer like what's happening in Louisiana right now, right, with the parish. You're going to suffer even harsher sentence, right? You're going to get even more years added on to the original years you had. So that's that. 30 minutes in. Great peace. Yakoki.